In a statement released by the UK Institute of Directors, Ali RENISON, head of Europe and Trade Policy at the Institute, said codifying a new UK internal market law for continuity purposes is good, but directors are wary of any moves that could increase the likelihood of no deal. Boris Johnson is on center stage at this afternoon's debate in Parliament on the controversial new bill in a bid to head off a growing Tory rebellion. With us live is Ali RENISON, head of Europe and Trade Policy at the IOD, commenting on the issues as well as other matters pertinent to the business and UK economy. Thank you so much for joining us, Ali. So why is this internal market bill so controversial?
Well, if it was doing what it was designed to do on the tin, if it was just about making sure that when the UK leaves the EU single market, that it's got powers in there to ensure that if you sell something in one part of the UK, let's say England, and you sell it to Scotland, the fact that Scotland, for example, is getting powers back from other parts of the EU after Brexit, the internal market bill is really about making sure that actually there's no barriers between parts of the UK after Brexit. So I think if it was just focusing on that, there would be widespread support for it. The reason it's obviously more contentious is because there is a provision in there that says basically, and there's debating opinion about whether this is more of a negotiating tactic from the UK, is a provision in there that says that basically if there's no deal, the UK government reserves the right to have powers that basically disapply parts of the Brexit deal that they agreed last year. And the government says that that's just a contingency measure in case there's no deal to make sure that they can protect their own internal market.
All right, thank you for that explanation. So look, I mean, business already has a lot on its plate. Is it paying too much attention to this?
It depends on who's paying attention. I think that the reason that it's important and the reason that you might have more eyes on it than normally is because this is potentially going to upend, and already has to some degree, the relations and the talks between the UK and the EU. We've had the European Commission President come out and criticize it. The EU itself has said, basically urged the government to withdraw that piece of the legislation by the end of the month, or we won't be able to get further in Brexit talks. And so really, I think the importance of it to business leaders is more that if that provision is not some way squared away, whether by government, there are rebellions within the government's governing party that say that this is potentially a threat to its own respectability when talking about the rule of law. But really, I think the big interest here is, does this provision actually make no deal more likely? And I think that's why you have businesses really sitting up and paying more attention.
All right. And so what is the most likely scenario on the bill? I mean, or what's the worst that could happen?
Well, I think the worst could happen is that the talks between the UK and the EU break down and don't break down in a very amicable way. And we have a very disruptive end to the current Brexit transition period, which is to say, even though technically the UK left the EU earlier this year, for business, for many people, there's actually been no real substantive change because we're in this kind of status quo transition period. So if we have the basically this in a standoff and neither side backs down and it derails the Brexit talks, you're basically looking at, amongst a host of other different areas, potentially, particularly as the UK tries to navigate its sort of smooth as possible chart back to economic recovery, this could actually send economic confidence shooting down again at the end of the year, which is the last thing you want to see. So I think the importance is to see, is there anything that within Parliament it can do? Will the government's own MPs actually get them to amend it and back down? Or will this lead to a nasty square out sort of draw between the UK and the EU where everything basically collapses?
That's a lot of different scenarios there. Thank you for that. On another topic, though, the extension of the furlough scheme ending next month, how's that likely to play out?
Well, I think that you're already starting to see a lot of pressure about, while there is I think there is general consensus about, this is not a permanent measure. And depending on how the economy I think it really depends on whether we have a big second wave or not that people have talked about of infections and cases in the UK. Because if that happens, then you're going to have a lot more people who are going to potentially be in need of that. But really, I think the focus now is more about what are the sectors that need a sort of leveling off, tapering off of that need. Because some of the sectors who are most restricted still by the existing restrictions in terms of operation, hospitality, and retail, the people basically who were most affected by that 1 to 2 meter social distancing requirement, they're the ones actually in terms of getting back to work that I think we're seeing the most need. So that's why there's some discussion in the UK now about, while the anticipation is that it will end, there's a big push for making sure that that end is staggered and sort of make sure that it looks at the sectors in the sort of wider light that they need to be looked at.
Okay, so that means that support could it be extended then?
It could be extended. There's a lot of pressure and a lot of noise in the UK right now about looking at potentially a sectoral-based tapering off. It's making sure that there's no hard stop, particularly because there's a lot of fear about, if you have that kind of nationwide, in any sense, lockdown again between now and winter, when everyone is saying that it might happen to be needed again, that's where you need to have, I think, the most flexibility for deciding, well, if we're going to end these schemes, make sure that they're flexible enough to react to a dramatic change in circumstances.
Okay, great. Now, just to follow up, is part of this pressure coming from what's happening elsewhere in Europe? For example, Germany is extending their stimulus, I believe, till their support scheme till 2021. I think they're sort of breaking their rules on deficit spending. Angela Merkel and her cabinet agreed to that. France is also making plans for further stimulus spending. Is that part of where the pressure is coming on the UK, saying that this is what other countries in Europe are doing? Or is that part of it, or pressure is coming from elsewhere?
I think the pressure is more coming domestically, particularly when you look at it in light of, do we end up having a disruptive, economically disruptive no deal with the EU at the end of the year? I think that's where a lot of the residual pressure is coming from, that nervousness about not knowing where the next spate of infections, if we have them, could land us as we get near towards winter. I would say, actually, this is probably government that cares least about comparisons with Europe to a certain extent. And actually, you're starting to see those ideological differences that sort of divide, I think, the UK to some extent socioeconomically from the rest of the continent, which is taking a much more directly sort of fiscal support stance, precautionary as well. So I think that, particularly with a conservative government, you are starting to see some of those long-standing ideological differences in why the rest of Europe is being so forthright and trying to stand behind those fiscal safety nets for a much longer period.
All right, thank you. And still back on trade matters, the UK struck a trade deal with Japan. How does this deal compare with the EU-Japan deal?
Well, in a way, we won't know. We're sort of going on what both sides' governments are telling us because we haven't seen the detail yet. What we had last week was an agreement in principle, basically both sides saying there's enough progress here for a deal and we can look forward to that. There'll be a period now where I would say it's a bit more than just dotting the I's and crossing the T's, but there's a lot more sort of substantive negotiations just to make sure that they're concluded. So in a way, what we can go on is both Japan and I think particularly the UK government have said that there are some more specific add-ons for the UK, particularly around data flows and digital services. I think some of the areas where, particularly because of differing European approaches on privacy rights, it was a lot more difficult for the EU to go as far as I think Japan wanted. So I think there are some more UK tailored specific add-ons, but for the most part, this deal is about making sure that we actually had that agreement replicated before there was any potential no deal outcome with the EU.
Thank you. I just got one more question for you. On the internal market bill, Nicola Sturgeon, head of the SNP, she kind of sent a tweet out saying that this would make Scotland kind of review their independence. Is that something she's going to follow through on, or it depends on how things work out with the bill?
I think, if we're going to go into some of those political discussions, I think inevitably any kind of noise and political jostling that involves anything constitutional, keep in mind that the internal market bill is a sensitive matter for some of the devolved governments in the UK. So that's Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because as they see it, powers are coming back from the EU and they want to make sure that their ability to use those powers isn't constrained by UK-wide internal market legislation. That is where I think more of the business community is, however. But I think what Nicola Sturgeon is probably very mindful of is that this bill is no longer just about the internal market provisions and legislation. It's taken on a life of its own, those provisions, and the minister saying that it would sort of break international law. There's a governance dimension to it. So it's a lot of noise at the moment that is probably helping that push for the independence in Scotland. But I think more widely, the bill's aims are more in step with where the business community are, apart from those Northern Ireland provisions.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Ali Renison, Head of Europe Trade Policy at the Institute of the IOD. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate your time and your insights.